Second thing I've got to stress here, and I've sort of alluded to this, but the scale is not always right. The scale is not always indicative of your progress. Let me say that again loud and clear. The scale is not always indicative of your progress. Why is this so important? Because so many people, are making false assumptions about their progress when they sit on the scale. Now, you might be thinking, hold on, Ryan, this has got nothing to do with actual tactics and strategy to lose weight. My friend, you are very mistaken. It absolutely does. I cannot tell you in what a regard, on what a pedestal I hold this subject, hold this bit of advice. Intermediates and advanced folk, they get it, they've got the experience, they've seen this pattern for themselves. You beginners right now, you need to understand how false the scale can be. Why? Because the body goes through day-to-day fluctuations. Ladies, the menstrual cycle, brilliant example of this. Perhaps the most I don't know the right language for this. I'm trying to think of the right language for this on the spot, but you're probably the factor that creates the most sensitivity in your body weight, probably above all else. You could argue sodium retention, but above all else, the way that body weight can fluctuate at different phases in the menstrual cycle is absolutely massive. I would say the body isn't as sensitive to any of the factors I'm about to mention here, but other things like water retention, subsequently sodium retention, or rather, if you have high sodium intake, then more water retention. If you're having a carbohydrate-rich diet, which again, most of my audience are, because carbs, again, so prominent with this plant-based approach, the good carbs, of course, I advocate. This can increase your water retention as well. Glycogen stores very full. You wind up holding on to more water than if you had a low-carb diet. Perhaps you had one meal very late at night the last night. What about bowel movements? I know, let's get into the nitty-gritty stuff. Bowel movements can make a real difference as well. So there's all sorts of things that can affect the number on the scale one morning when you weigh in. But yet so many beginners are misled by that number, thinking, oh, I'm not losing weight. What happens then? Do they talk themselves out of the strategy they're following? Worse yet, do they give up altogether? Do they make premature changes? Okay, it might not sound like an obvious piece of advice for a weight loss beginner, as I said a couple of minutes ago. However, you can see with a bit of analysis how integral having a good system for weighing yourself actually is, and how not taking that number too literally with an individual weigh-in can be so important. Because what's the adverse of that? What's the opposite of that? We tinker with our strategy. We change something, as I say, prematurely. We create all of this mental and emotional stress when we think we're not losing weight. Now, don't get me wrong. The scale could be right. And that's the obvious caveat here, isn't it? The scale could be right. And you might be thinking, Ryan, well, how do I tell if the scale is right? How do I determine if an individual weigh-in is a good one or a bad one? You can't. You can do this little analysis and you can think, okay, ladies, where am I at in my cycle? Or did I have a big salty meal last night? Or did I eat a bit later last night? Have I had a bowel movement this morning? You can play those sorts of games, but frankly, folks, you're never going to know for sure. You're absolutely not. And so this is why you must do multiple weigh-ins. And that's why, again, earlier on I said 3 times per week, and judge your progress by the weekly trend as a rule of thumb versus the individual weigh-in, because it's so unreliable. So again, check out that How to Weigh Yourself for Weight Loss Success live stream on my YouTube homepage in the Ryan's Live Streams playlist. That's going to give you more info on this, but I cannot stress how important it is to have a good system for monitoring your progress, so you don't give up too soon, so you actually know if you truly are or not losing weight. And also, it's nice to monitor your progress for the sake of, seeing how well you're doing, aside from just sort of troubleshooting and making sure, that weight loss is happening. But for your sake, it's really awesome to see that number go down week to week and to sort of troubleshoot those problems when they do come up. Now, again, another bit of advice that I just thought of here. I was going to wrap up on the next one, but this is really key because I'm always asked about plateaus. What I say to my clients is my general rule, there are lots of exceptions to this, as I said, it's a general rule, is that if your weight has not budged and you're doing 3 times weigh-ins per week, and there aren't too many other mitigating circumstances, such as you're taking antibiotics, such as you're at a certain point in your menstrual cycle, let's say PMS or early menstruation, which can really, really affect the amount of water retention people go through. If one of those big influences doesn't seem to be present when you sit down and think about this, 2 weeks is probably a good rule of thumb to say to yourself, right, if the weight hasn't budged all that much, there's a good chance I'm in a plateau now. But again, I want to stress it's a rule of thumb. So 2 weeks. Some of you have one weigh-in and you think you're plateauing and you give up or you change your strategy. One weigh-in, okay? And here's a weight loss coach who's helped hundreds of people with this stuff now, and I'm saying to you, 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Now, again, don't get me wrong, some of you will enter a plateau, and therefore it is almost lost time. That 2-week period, or that week and a half period, or that week period, you're having several couple of weigh-ins, but because I've said to you 2 weeks, you go an extra week, that might be lost time, okay? So again, there is a caveat to this, but you can't know for sure, as a rule of thumb, until 2 weeks have passed, as long as there's not any mitigating circumstances. So again, I think the tagline here, and the little motto I want you to take away, is don't judge all of your success by an individual weigh-in. Think about the trend. That's what we're looking for here. I know this is a bit cliche, but this is something so many people miss, okay? As long as you're on the downward trend, generally, you're doing something right. Could it be faster? Yeah, absolutely. And maybe some troubleshooting is required in that regard. But yeah, make sure you are correctly judging your plateaus, and that is why weighing yourself with a good system, a realistic system, and not having any illusions about what one individual weigh-in can mean is so important.